But a lot of times where that comes from is that we wrestle with doing that for ourselves. And if we don't believe that we're worthy of that or deserving of that, it's hard to give the gift to other people. And so a lot of times when someone comes to me and they're like, I can't forgive other people, I'm like, start with yourself. Start with yourself, and then we'll work from there.
Can't wait to introduce you to our guest. Maybe you have been broken. Maybe it's something in your past that's causing issues. And we're talking to somebody who knows that, who's been through some childhood trauma, substance abuse, depression, and that kind of thing. He's an author, a therapist. We have Jason VanRuler with us this morning, and his book is called Get Past Your Past, How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. Well, thank you, Jason, for joining the show today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your personal journey from growing up in what sounds like is a challenging environment, and how that led you to become a licensed therapist and now an author.
Yeah, well, I always tell people I've always wanted to become a therapist, and mostly because I always dressed like a therapist. So I knew at an early age, when I had my corduroys and my Bass Weegians, that I was probably only cut for a couple things. Being a therapist is one of them. So I like literally have a journal when I was 8, and I wrote about wanting to become a therapist. So I knew that for a long time, and I really had like my life all mapped out. And then my parents divorced at 8, and so we went from really this idyllic childhood to a childhood filled with like addiction and abuse and trauma, and just really in a split second. And so, again, I thought I had everything figured out. It ended up being way different, right? And worse than I imagined. And so out of that, I kind of came out pretty broken and bruised, and did what a lot of people do, which is just swear off what they came from, right? I graduated high school, and I was like, hey, just so you know, and I kind of made this big declaration, I'm going to be different. You'll see. And man, then like in a couple years, I just did all the same stuff. A couple of years later, I'm like, oh, I'm not paying my bills. I'm drinking too much. I have all the wrong friends. I'm not honoring myself, not honoring my faith. And it just really dawned on me in a moment. It's very cliche, but in a moment, like in front of the mirror, that I was just like, oh man, I think I just did a circle. Like I was so sure I was setting out on this new path, and I think I just like actually made another lap.
Ooh.
And what am I going to do now?
Yeah. It's encouraging to know that, you can heal from brokenness, but what about those who are, trying to overcome the feeling like I'm the only one, fill in the blank? And I feel like that's a tool of the enemy, make you feel like you're the only one going through what you're going through, but you're not.
Yeah, I mean, you're the only one just like everyone else. Yeah, you're the only one just like everyone else. So totally.
Yeah.
But hey, I felt that way. I think what the struggle was for me is I felt like my situation's either too bad or not bad enough to talk about. And I think we fall into that camp, right? I'm unique because it's too bad, no one would understand. Or it's not bad enough, and I'm not sure why I feel the way I feel, and so I shouldn't say anything. And I think to your point that is just a lie. I get the privilege of getting to work with lots of people in a given year, doing workshops and retreats. So, I'm coming into contact with thousands of people. And every time it's the same. Somebody raises their hand and they say, I'm going to share my story, but I'm certain no one can relate. And now that I've done this a little bit, I'm always like, okay, well, I'll wait for the part where everyone can relate. But they always start the same, right? It's no one's going to understand, because we genuinely feel that way. It's legitimate. But then what always happens is they say, so here's my story. And again, I'm probably the only one. And then someone else's hand raises. And they say, yeah, me too, or a version of that. And what we find is that as different as we feel, we're actually more of the same, and we're connected. And that's a very beautiful thing, to get to witness that moment where someone realizes it's not just them.
That's so important too. I think just embracing the past, like even looking at my brokenness in the past is so difficult. I grew up without my birth father in my life, severe mental health issues that weren't even diagnosed until I was a teenager. Everybody's like, what is wrong with her? And there's a lot there, a lot of unforgiveness. And it's difficult to even look back at those parts of my life. Why do you think it's important to embrace that, though? Like, how does that help us be able to move forward?
Yeah, I think the question you ask is one that a lot of people ask, right? Is it's sort of like, hey, I'm past that. I don't want to think about it anymore. What is the value in going back to a tough time, or even just going back, period? A lot of people say to me, hey, I had a great childhood. Why would I think about my past? And really the answer is the same. It's because if we don't understand it, we replicate it. And the problem is a lot of us aren't okay with it. And so if we're not okay with replicating it, we need to understand what happened and what it taught us. Because the thing is our childhood, for better or for worse, it really taught us about how to be an adult. And so we've learned that. And if we don't understand what we've learned, we just do what we were taught. And sometimes that's great, right? Sometimes just what we were taught is good enough. But a lot of times there's things we would rather not replicate that if we don't look at, we end up doing.
That's smart. So how? How do we confront it? Like, what are some baby steps, some practical things that we can do to take steps towards looking the past in the face and dealing with it?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a therapist, so I just ask questions. So I have not figured that part out yet. I'm really good at questions. No, I'm giving you a hard time. We do it slowly. So a lot of times people are like, well, what does this mean? Like, am I going to have to like be in therapy forever or sit around and cry and all these things? And it's like, no, like we're just going to look back and we're going to kind of try to figure out like, what have I learned? And so even sometimes just sitting down and just saying like, when I think about my childhood, what did it teach me about relationships? What did it teach me about marriage? What did it teach me about success? What did it teach me about work? What did it teach me about purpose? And just really writing down like what did I actually get taught about those things? And then the next step is to really identify what do I want to do with that? So do I want to replicate that? Do I want to replace that? Or do I want to refine it? And it could just be that simple, right? You can say, well, what I learned about marriage from my parents, well, they got divorced, so I learned that you can't count on it. Do I want to carry that into my adult life? No. What would I say differently today? Well, yes, some marriages end, but it's something worth trying for and working on. So we might look at that and just say, like, here's what I was taught, but here's what I think now, and which one serves me better.
Wow. I'm just really camping out on that phrase. If we don't understand it, we replicate it. Because, just in my background in history, it's like, let's just bury that stuff. Let's just skip we have to feel our grief to fully heal from it part of healing. And yet those words you're saying are just really echoing in my head. Do we really have to go back and feel that grief in order to heal from it?
I hear you going, Sally. Do we have to?
Please, can you? I'm like 7 again.
Give me out.
I don't want to.
Have to? Yeah, you don't have to. You might get to, though. I always think about my wife grew up on this farm in this small town. And so they had this place where they would, they'd do like a lot of small towns and farms do, where they just bury a bunch of stuff in the yard, right? They just go like, I don't know what to do with this thing. Let's just dig a big hole and throw stuff in it and put dirt on it.
Yes.
And it's a very, like, I get it. Like, I would do the same thing. Like, I don't know how to, safely dispose of this, so let's just put it in a hole and cover it with dirt. But then obviously over time we've learned like that actually poisons the water, right? That actually seeps out into the ground and it poisons everything. And so even though we can't see it, it's still there. And I think if we don't deal with our past, and especially some of those hard things that maybe we're not at peace with or haven't understood, it does the same thing. And so you might say, well, hey, that's underground and there's grass growing there now and I don't need to think about it. And I say, yeah, well, maybe not, but what's it doing underneath? And the chances are underneath it's just leaking out onto everything else.
Interesting. Wow.
That is interesting.
I don't think that's the answer I wanted.
Same.
Well, I aim to please. So what answer can I give you? Yes, don't deal with it at all. Yeah, just leave it.
There you go.
No problem.
Okay, now 7-year-old Sally's happy.
I'll take door number 2.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
So truly healing then involves taking that top dirt off and digging up what's buried. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like. I've never been to a formal counselor, so it's kind of a mystery to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of even like when I was talking about the journaling prompts, it's just looking at what that is, right? So when I work with a client and we talk about their past, what I would typically do is say, we're going to work together. I want you to bring in your 10 most impactful moments in your childhood. And so just identify what those are. Those might be positive, negative, neutral, but identify what they are, and let's talk through what those taught you. Okay, and so they might be lovely moments, right? You might say,
Sure.
well, one of my most is when, my dad came to my game, or so it doesn't have to be negative, but just when you think about your childhood, what are the 10 most impactful moments and what did they teach you? And just doing that will tell you a lot about how you live today.
Wow. Okay.
That's interesting.
I like that.
Now, I got to know this. I don't think we've addressed it. I have a little ADD, so maybe we did.
Welcome. Me too. Me too.
Why is it that if you don't address something from your past, you're likely to repeat it? Well, is it sort of like, in a way, without wanting to, it's learned behavior? What's the thought process there?
Yeah, well, it's like programming. If you program, a software program incorrectly, it just continues to be incorrect, right? And so the issue is, we have kind of this programming language, and then if we don't address that, we just continue to do that. Because, again, it's what we learned.
Yeah, well, it's like, you hear these stories of people that were abused as they grew up, and they end up abusing their kids. I don't think anybody wants to do that. Maybe I'm wrong.
No,
But-
I don't think they do either. But
Yeah.
and not to justify anything like that, but just to say, we don't sometimes understand what we need to do to get out of that. And so they'll replicate it, or sometimes people react to it, right? So they'll say, well, I'm never going to be that person, so I'll be the opposite. And sometimes the opposite is just as painful, right? So they say, well, my parents always talked and they told me way too much stuff, and it hurt my feelings to always hear their opinions, and so I'm just never going to do that to my kids. And then their kids are like, my parents never talked to me. And so I think sometimes like we do this thing where the opposite of one extreme is another, and so then neither one are very helpful, right? So we have to just kind of understand, like, where did we come from? And then if we were intentional, because one of the biggest regrets people have when they're dying is not living an intentional life. If we were intentional, how would we want to do this?
That's good. It reminds me of, the way my wife was raised. Sometimes she feels like it was a little too harsh. And sometimes I feel like she's going to the opposite direction. We're a little too soft on our kids.
It's like, well, I've got a solution. There were too many rules, so no rules. Just
There
do
you
whatever
go.
you want. Yep.
Well, it's not that bad. But yeah, that's interesting. I imagine, obviously, it's important to talk to God about, your problems or things that you've had. How about having support from a trusted friend?
Yeah, both of those. I mean, I think, I'm a faith person, so to me, God and really in the Bible, Jesus is really the best example of a secure relationship that we'd all want, right? Jesus just keeps showing up in such a secure way that if we actually want a role model, like, we just have to look to Scripture that shows us exactly how to do that. So I think that's really important, but then also having community and friends. I mean, therapists are great. Obviously, I have to say that because I think I'll get in trouble if I don't. So we're great. But here's the truth. We were raised to be in relationship and community. And so while therapy can be really helpful, if the only person you have in your life that you can actually talk to is a therapist, we need to add some people because we need a community too.
Yeah. How do you know that you've got that safe person?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of times what happens is people get hurt, and so they're a little bit jaded and cynical, and so I'll talk to them and they'll say, well, fine, I'm going to try to trust somebody, and then they'll just pick a person. They'll just say, it turns out you're going to be my safe person today, and I'm just going to tell you everything. And what happens with that, if they're not careful, is they pick the wrong person, or they pick a person who's not willing or able to really meet them, and it fails, and then the person says, see, that's why I don't do this. And so what's important is to understand, like, a safe person is a person who could actually help you. They don't have an agenda for you. They're not trying to take something from you. They've got good boundaries. They're willing to tell you the hard thing. So there are some qualities that we would look for. And then the other part is just to start small. It's hard, but if you're going to try being vulnerable with somebody, start small and work your way up.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. Self-acceptance. Man, I don't know a single person that doesn't struggle with that. I'm a prime example. Like, I look at what society expects of me, or what I think they expect of me, and all the ways I don't measure up there. I'm also really bad about deciding what people probably want from me, and then that's the version of myself that I give them, which a lot of times I'll just decide that for the person. Like, this is who you must want me to be. How on earth do we get free of that? Like, how do we learn to just accept ourselves and then be ourselves, most importantly?
Yeah. Well, it's really hard. And I think even with like social media and things now more than ever, there's a lot of opinions about who we're supposed to be. You know, there's never been a shortage of that, but now more than ever, there's like a line of people telling you how to act and who to be. And then we make up who other people want us to be. But the problem is it's actually just not that complicated. You know, God just calls us to be ourselves, and we know who that person is. And I think that we all have things in our life that we do that remind us of who that person is. So for me, and I'm going to, say the middle-aged guy hobby here that probably a lot of middle-aged guys have, but I like to fly fish, right? And so I like to go out and walk in the river for hours at a time and not catch anything because I'm terrible at it, but I love to do it. And if you were to catch me fly fishing, I know who I am. Okay, I know who I am because I'm doing what I love. Okay, and so what I want to do is find the places where I know who I am because I'm doing what I love and be that person always.
I like that. I like to fish too in my Sims game.
Okay, yeah. Well, you probably have better
comfort
luck
of
than
my
I
office.
do, and you probably spend less money and don't get as dirty. So that might actually be better for me.
Oh,
You don't have to touch worms.
exactly right.
That would be great.
Oh man, I've just started working with a new therapist, and looking at just especially my past and even who I am in the present. She's like, you are really hard on yourself. There are very few places that you offer yourself compassion, if any, and certainly no self-acceptance. And she's trying to really get me to be able to do that, because she's like, that's going to be very important in overcoming the parts of your past that you see as broken. You're going to have to offer yourself a little bit of leniency somewhere, a little bit of compassion. Talk about that some.
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorite hobbies is beating myself up about stuff. So I relate.
Personal Fight Club?
Yeah, I'm pretty good at it. I mean, I can just for hours do that.
Jason comes to the interviews black and blue.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get it. Like, I would do that, and as part of the book and in the tour and stuff. I've done a lot of podcasts, and one of my favorite things is afterwards just go, why did I say that? What was that about? I'm so embarrassed. But the thing that I'm learning is this, and this is the thing I teach clients too, is we have two hands, and one is for grace and one is for truth, and we're always better at one than the other. Right. And so some of us are really good at truth, right? We analyze things and we just say, hey, the truth about this is I wish I would have done it differently, but we miss the grace. And then others of us, we're way too good at the grace, right? We're like, everything's great and I never mess up and it's perfect. And it's like, you need some truth. So I think it's just kind of understanding that, okay, you're heavy on truth, right? You're heavy on judgment. You're heavy on analyzing. But what would grace tell you about these things? And so you can literally just kind of think in your head of like, okay, well, maybe that's that harsh judgment truth piece. But what would the grace part be? If I had grace for myself, what would I tell myself in this moment? Or even what would I tell a child? Or what would I tell somebody I loved about what just happened? And it's just training ourselves to think about it a little more objectively and to be a little more balanced.
Wow.
I like that.
That's good. Offer ourselves some grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people need the
is.
truth, right? Sometimes I meet with a client,
Yeah.
I'm like, you need truth.
We were just
Like-
having this conversation this morning about judgment, and Misty, you said something. You're like, I want to be the one that judges.
Right.
That's right.
Can I please deliver the justice?
Yes.
You're probably good at it. You're probably great at it.
I excel. It is a spiritual gift. Thank you for recognizing that.
I do recognize it.
so
I
validated.
encourage it. I love it. It's great.
I feel seen and loved.
Keiko Fritz and I just try to dodge it.
It's not too bad. I enjoy it, actually. I like to get razzed.
Yeah.
She's
You
pretty
just say, hey,
gracious
remember
toward that.
grace? Remember what Jason said about grace? Let's
right.
apply that here.
Yeah, I need a little of that. I really relate to something you said earlier about childhood memories and how they influence who we are today. And one memory that I talk about as being the most influential for me is I was sick until I was 15 and surgery solved things, but I lived in pain until then. And just a stark childhood memory of mine is looking at my mom making dinner, thinking, and I was probably 4, how am I going to make dinner for my family when I hurt like this? Well, how I see that affecting me today is I tend to be very independent. I think of even asking for help or telling somebody I'm over the top with everything I've got. Overcoming brokenness for me sometimes is just being, having the courage, let's say, to be willing to say, I need help. And I see that really affecting me. And I always think people should be just really proud of my independence, but I find they're not always so proud of it. So,
well, they should be. Let's be honest. They should be.
Yes, they should be.
Yes, they should. Well, here's what I'll tell you is I think we always are best at giving the gift to other people that we didn't get because we know how much it matters, right? We know how much you wanted to be able to do that. And so you're great at giving that to other people. But the problem is that the more we do for other people, the less they feel we need them. And when people don't feel needed or wanted, they have a hard time being in a relationship with us because they're not sure what they're supposed to do. And so while I totally get it, and I'm that way too, I'm like, I'll just never ask you for anything ever. For people around people like us, they go, what's my role here? Am I the person that just is supposed to take from them, or am I the person who they just kind of keep around, or like, what can I do? And so what's interesting in relationships where someone is really, they do all the things and they don't ask for help, I can literally change the relationship in one move because I'll say, hey, go home to your spouse and ask them for something. And they'll be like, what do you mean? I'll be like, just go ask for one thing and watch what happens. And usually that person is waiting and they are so excited to do the thing because they go, now I get to have a purpose here.
I love that. Yeah, I think of how often my husband says, well, let me do that. And I say, no, I've got this. And I always think he dies a little bit inside when I do that, and Sally, just step aside for a second, let him do it, even though you can, So I think having the courage to really just open ourselves up to the love and connection that people are trying to make with me, that I'm like, no, I've got this, It's my own fault, it seems, for causing people to back off. And then I kind of sit and pout and wonder why I don't have a ton of friends, because they don't feel like I need them, probably.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think where that comes from, like what you're saying, where that comes from is a very legitimate place, right? Because it made sense then, it's just out of context now, right? And so if I had known you when you were sick, that makes perfect sense. That's the thing, that's the reason it's so important to update this stuff is then it made sense, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you lived. It's just if we don't know that today, we carry that into an environment where it no longer makes sense.
That's interesting.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Yeah, it's pretty challenging, a lot of us, to consider that journey of looking at our past and healing from it. And I'm just curious, you have a story about looking your brokenness in the face. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, which story? There's been about 27 times that I've done that, unfortunately. which time are you referencing?
Well, I just say there were several. I mean, you can just pick one of them. Yeah. Difficult.
I think for me, personal growth has been looking at that over and over again. And usually with a bad attitude, if I'm being honest. I'm usually not happy to do that. But I think what it's looked at is it's, there's that moment where I looked in the mirror and I saw myself and I was just like, if I'm being honest, I don't like this person. But I also talk in the book about a moment where I'm in this trailer welding, and if you know me at all by now, you can tell by the suit that I definitely.
I remember.
I'm a
story.
welder. You can probably see how good of a welder I'd make. But I just at that point had just given up. Right, I just really was refusing to look at why I was where I was at, and I was refusing to make peace with God, and just was angry. And so that led me to a place where I got this job and I'm just trying to kind of survive. And so I got this job welding trailers. And there's nothing wrong with the job other than it's totally wrong for me, right? And so I'm in this trailer and we're welding and a spark flies down my shirt. And the person I'm working with just says like, hey, don't worry, you'll get used to it.
Oh.
And I just think to myself, I don't want to get used to it.
Yeah, no kidding.
that's not a thing I want to get used to. But it just, for me, it resonated so much because don't we do that about our past? These painful things that keep coming up, and we just go, it's okay, I'll get used to it. You'll get used to people letting you down because it's what you've always known. You'll get used to failure because it's what you've always known. You'll get used to pain. You'll get used to hurt. And I just think for me in that moment, I just said, I don't want to get used to this. I really don't. But that means I have to look at the thing I don't want to look at.
That's good. You know, personally, some of the issues that I've had to deal with because of my job, radio is a transient. If people don't know, radio can be a very transient job because you're constantly trying to get to a larger market because you'll get paid more because there's more audience, and it's just kind of the way it goes. Or you get fired a lot. There's a lot of firing in this business.
Yeah.
All I know about radio is people have always said I have a face for radio, and I don't know what that means. I think it's a compliment, but I've heard that before, so I don't know.
So what I'm wondering is this, you know, it wasn't until I moved my family for the third time that I realized how this was affecting my wife. Because every time I'm pulling her out of a community where she's made friends, she's made deep relationships, and some of it was me pushing for that next promotion. But I look back on it, Jason, I'm like, man, there are some stations I should have just stayed there. Why did I move on? And so I've had a hard time feeling bad about what I've done. It's obviously really affected her. And how do you look at something like that?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that you feel bad about it indicates you've grown, right? Because here's the thing is people don't feel bad about stuff that they haven't grown past. So the fact that you even feel bad indicates that you get it, right? You got insight. And then I think with that insight, you just kind of say, what do I want to do now that I know?
Yeah.
Is that a conversation I want to have? I can't take back what's happened. So what do I want to do now? And how do I use this to empower me to be better instead of hold myself to regret and keep myself small? Because the truth is, and it stinks, but like life is messy and we're going to have a lot of these things, all of us. And so what matters is not that we have them or don't have them, because we will, but what we do with those. And I think the best people, who are the wisest people, they take those and they use them to be better. And so they might say, well, now I really understand my wife. And I also understand maybe I chased some things for reasons that maybe weren't as important as I thought. And so going forward, I'm going to make decisions differently.
Yeah. Just wish I had known that 10, 15 years ago.
Well, from my point of view, I am happy that you made the changes that led to where you're at right now.
I'll just say I'm happy here. I have no interest in going anywere else.
Thank you, Lord.
Always good to say that. Yes, that's helpful.
The president and CEO is listening to this.
But we rack up experiences like that, right? Where we just look back and we just go, oh man, I do it totally different today. And I just say, well, good. You should look at some things and think that. If you look at your past and you say everything I did was perfect, that's a different problem to talk about.
That is true.
Yeah. Totally different.
Got that right.
Big issue. When looking at our pasts and things that are broken, I think and as a therapist, you probably deal with this a lot. Forgiveness, or maybe the reluctance to forgive. We have a lot of conversations about forgiveness on our show because I can't forgive anybody. I struggle with that so much. I mean, honestly, like I've been able to truly forgive 2 or 3 times in my life. I mean, it took me 46 years to forgive my dad. I was only able to do that 2 years ago, for crying out loud. Somebody who was never part of my life, and I just couldn't let it go. If you ask me what I remember about the first day of kindergarten, not all the wonderful new things that I got to experience and all the fun stuff. I remember the little girl who sat next to me in the seat that I had reserved for my friend, and she wouldn't move because she thought it was really fun to sit there and bother me. Like, that's what I remember. That's ridiculous. So I have a list. I have a list of people that have offended me, and I can't let it go
and
to
I'm
save
I'm
my
on
life.
That list.
I know. We're trying to stay off of that list.
Present company excluded.
Me out in
present
this
company.
Kink.
It's like, well, some people are earning their way onto the list.
Right?
Today,
Exactly.
but,
Welcome to the list. But why is it so difficult? Why do we have such a hard time with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think sometimes it justifies our pain to hold on to that stuff, right? Because then we feel like it makes sense that we feel that way because we have evidence. And I would just say, you don't need the evidence. You know if it hurt. You don't need to prove it. It matters that you feel the way you do. And so I think we hold this as sort of this testament to say, like, see, this is why I am the way I am. This is why I feel the way I feel. And I just go like, oh, I don't think you need that at all. I don't think that actually matters. It just matters how you feel about it and what do you want to do now. And so my challenge to a lot of people is just that forgiveness is usually the process of 1,000 decisions. And so I'm not asking you to forgive it all today. I'm just saying, will you forgive it for today? And what you find is if you get in the habit of you just go, hey, today I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to let it go for today, and you do that a couple of days, eventually you just go, I'm kind of tired of thinking about it every day. I don't know. Turns out like it's just exhausting to me. I want to be done with it.
That's good.
Yeah. We're learning so much about the importance of forgiveness, like even in, quote unquote, secular communities. Doctors will say forgiveness is so important to healing. Non-faith-based therapists will talk about the importance of forgiveness. Why is that? I mean, obviously, like the Bible tells us to forgive. That's a big thing right there.
I think
But
it's in there.
just
Yeah, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I think it mentions once or twice something about that. Yeah.
but just for ourselves, because they talk about what not forgiving somebody is like swallowing poison and then hoping somebody else dies. Why is it so important just on our personal journey to just let it go and give it to God?
Yeah, because I think we really struggle to be able to pay attention to 10 things at once, right? And so if we're hanging on to that is impacting how we see everything else. And so what the goal is to really always keep our focus on what matters. And we can't do that if we're holding on to an anchor in the past. We can't do that if we're holding on to anger and to someone that's hurt us. And so I think that's the thing is I like to clean out my email inbox every day because I feel better about myself, right? I go, hey, I feel good now. I'm just ready for the day. And forgiveness is a lot like that. It's a daily thing where we just say, like, I'm going to clean that out. I don't want to carry this into tomorrow. I'm going to go in with 0 because when I go in with 0, I'm able to be present in this moment with you. And that's the goal. That's what we're really trying to do.
I remember being startled when I had a therapist that was because I had forgiven my dad and then I unforgave him. And she was like, well, it's not really a one-time thing. This is something sometimes we have to do over and over. And I went, what? Like, I thought you just forgave somebody and it was over.
You're confused because you're like, well, did I forgive?
Yeah.
Or didn't I? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's confusing.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, the enemy loves to bring it up and throw it in our face again. Like, I can't believe you let this go. Remember how much this hurts? So,
and doesn't that have something to do too with your outlook on yourself? If you're constantly being critical of somebody else, because that's sort of what it means to me to hold back on forgiveness.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the therapist thing here, which you're all going to love, but the people who struggle most to forgive others usually don't forgive themselves, right? So that usually starts within. Sorry, I warned you. It's usually
we've been talking about that a lot in therapy too.
I will usually ask my client. I'll just say like, "Hey, have you forgiven yourself yet?" And they're like, "Oh, Jason." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'll ask you the next time." And they're like, "Oh, okay, all right." But a lot of times where that comes from is that we wrestle with doing that for ourselves. And if we don't believe that we're worthy of that or deserving of that, it's hard to give the gift to other people. And so a lot of times when someone comes to me and they're like, I can't forgive other people, I'm like, start with yourself. Start with yourself, and then we'll work from there.
Man. Wait, how much do I owe you for this?
I'm billing each of you.
Good.
My assistant is billing each of you right now. You'll get an invoice in the mail.
You are
30
justified
days.
in that.
Just get it paid. Yes, if you would.
Right. You have your work cut out with this.
When he's done with it, he's like, oh, golly, man.
When
was
your
something
book
else.
came across my desk, Get Past Your Past, I thought, I don't know if I want to go down that deep road. But what caught me was your subtitle. How facing your broken places leads to true connection. You got me there. I was like, that's what I need, is that true connection. And that's why I picked it up and just read through this like it was a novel. And it just spoke to me so easily and so clearly. So I want to say thank you for that. But for our listeners who might be feeling stuck in their brokenness, what tips or words of encouragement can you share that maybe would lead them to picking up your book, Get Past Your Past?
Yeah. Well, and just first, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for reading it. I mean, I get it. You know, when I was writing this book, I was like, oh man, is this going to be a super popular book? You know, are people going to be like, I think if I wrote a book, How to Make $1 Million in a Week, that would sell really, really well, right?
Yeah.
Get past your past. People are like,
That should be your subtitle.
I'm telling
Make $1
you,
million.
talked about it, should have done it. But the get past your past premise is like, I don't know about that. And yet, I think it's the work we need to do. If you're listening and you're stuck and you're a person saying, this is great and everything, but like you don't understand. You don't understand how bad it's been, or you don't understand how afraid I am to look at that, or you don't understand how much that hurt. I just feel like I see you. I hear you, and as much as I can, I do. But the person, really, God understands it entirely. And so if you want to start somewhere, practice this thing where you just get into prayer and you just tell God what's going on. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself is the best first step I could give you, is just go to prayer. And you might even show up in prayer and just say, hey, I don't know what I'm supposed to say or how I'm supposed to do this, but here's what's on my heart right now. Mm. And as we do that, we build some confidence, and then we be able to start to do that with some other people, right? But we need to oftentimes build some confidence and also just build the ability to just tell the truth about what's really happening. It's hard to do that with people if we're not in the habit of doing it. And so we have this kind of tendency to maybe sugarcoat things a little bit, or maybe say, well, it's kind of this, not that. But I think prayer is a great place to go and just say, like, here is the truth. I don't like it, or I wish it were different, but here it is.
And here I am saying something where I think, well, no one can relate to this one.
I'm going to write it down. I mean, if this is truly no one can relate, I'm going to write it down because it'll be a first.
I know that this is common, especially with possibly parents of special needs kids. We have a daughter diagnosed with some multiple disabilities, and it really, Jason, it was from a bad doctor. And what happened was my wife had undiagnosed preeclampsia and should have been in bed rest for a significant amount of time. And so preeclampsia is high blood pressure that you can't control. And what happened is it caused the umbilical cord to hemorrhage inside. And we don't know how long that was going on, but there were signs of it. When you go in for those non-stress tests, they put the goop on the stomach and they, move that thing around to hear the heartbeat and things like that. They were having a hard time getting our daughter to move. Well, that should be a sign there's a problem. And so part of my regret is that I wasn't more vigilant, but I didn't know then what I know now, that you really have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate, but we are dealing daily with the consequences of that. And there are times where my body is exhausted. It's tired. My body doesn't work real well because I haven't been picking her up the way I should over the years. It's just bad back, all kinds of other things going on. And I'll be late in the evening trying to get her in bed and changing her clothes. And because she's completely dependent, she's non-ambulatory, totally dependent on us. And I'll break down. I'll be like, here I am again. And somebody called that a living grief. It's not something that completely goes away. But every once in a while, I have a hard time moving on from that spot because in my mind, it's replaying everything I went through.
And how it could have been different.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I try to get past it, but, and not that I'm not thankful for the daughter that we have. Mm-hmm. Even though she's nonverbal, she cries, she laughs, she's a joy. It's just physically very demanding, and there's an emotional part of that too. That's where I have a hard time moving on. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to apologize to me. That makes sense. You'd get emotional. It sounds really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I'd do that. And I think sometimes that is the situation we find ourselves in, is that there is no great reframe, right? There's no easier way to put it. It's not one of those situations. And so I think in that moment, we just try to figure out, like, how do I honor what's happening now, and how do I be present, and how do I find beauty in the place that I'm at, while also acknowledging that it hurts. Mm. And some days it hurts a lot. And finding people who get that and understand that it hurts a lot. Because to your point, it would be nice to put our past in this neat little package and just say, well, there we go. It's done.
Yep.
But some of this stuff we'll deal with for the rest of our lives. It'll be with us. We'll limp, and it'll be a reminder of the wrestling that we've done. It'll be a reminder of the places we've been. And I think when we do that's both beautiful and painful all at once. And so I just tell you,
Wow.
in that moment, it's okay to hurt.
Yeah.
It should hurt. It's a painful situation. And there's time for that. And then there's time to hear her laugh and have it be so beautiful you can't imagine it. And just say, both exist. I think the trouble happens when we try to tell ourselves we're only allowed to feel one.
Ooh.
I like to think that is the personification, if you will, of your subtitle of Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. Because Misty and I are here for you. And I know you have the mornings that you let us know you're going to be late coming in. And I think that God just has so beautifully put this team together that I know I feel such freedom to be who I am on that morning and that day together. And I hope we extend that to you too, Kank. And, some days are harder than others for all of us. And so we love you and Becky and Sam and Abby. And I like to think that we're experiencing God's gift of true connection together. So, Jason, thank you for bringing that whole thing into a sentence, how facing your broken places leads to true connection. So we're all a bit broken, aren't we? And life is hard. I appreciate what you said, Jason.
Yeah, but when we see it in other people, we run towards it. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is the thing that we think will push people away is what actually draws them near.
Yeah.
And so that's not an encouragement to say, well, go find all kinds of broken things to be part of. But it's just to say, like, our broken places are truly where we show up for each other, and so I know it feels like we shouldn't, but when we do, boy, those relationships thrive.
I've heard it said that we're more alike in our weaknesses than our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
This
wish
is
that
good.
were different, but it's true.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Get past your past. Jason VanRuler. And Jason, if people, or is it VanRuler? I like Vaughn. It sounds like
That actually sounds classier. I'm all about it. That sounds fine with me. I'm not going to argue with you. I'll take it.
Jason VanRuler, thank you so much for your time. If people want to know more about you, is there a website or somewhere they could go? Or
Yeah, if you are hearing my voice now and you think, man, I wish I could hear that guy's voice every day and watch him sweat on camera and give me relationship advice, have I got a deal for you? I'm on Instagram all the time posting about how to have healthier relationships. So it's jason.vanruler, or my website is jasonvr, and you can find where I'm speaking next if you want to go there.
cool. Awesome.
And now we owe
That's
him
great.
our address to send his invoice.
Exactly. Exactly.
I put the link in the chat. You'll get it. Don't worry about it.
That's awesome. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Really good stuff.
Oh, I'm grateful for this. Thank you all so much.